Brightburn is a very unique film, simply because I don't know many that are in this area of superhero horror film. And that's really what this is labeled as. It's labeled as a superhero horror film. Now, what essentially is Brightburn for those who probably have never seen it, or maybe it flew onto some people's radar, or maybe because it's, 3 years old at this point and it didn't really get as many hits and not too many people really cared for it when it first came out. Any of these certain things that might have happened during its initial run where people probably don't talk about it. And I feel like it's worth talking about because to me, it's like this step into the what if universe where like for those who are sort of aware of what the what if universe is, it's like what Marvel did with the What If series, where it's like, what if there was a zombie apocalypse in the Marvel universe and all that kind of stuff. So there's different variations of that across all types of comic books and superhero storylines. One of my favorite is, I think I've actually mentioned it in my entry for the What If universe. My favorite is what if the Punisher killed the Marvel universe, where it's instead of his family dying during like this drug gang hit or getting murdered by people who Frank Castle wronged, all the many different ways that Frank Castle's family has died in order to drive him crazy and go on, being the killing vigilante that he is. His family dies during a battle between, I believe it's the X-Men and Sentinels, or it's the X-Men and some other superheroes or supervillains. I forget what the actual battle is, but his family dies during that battle. So he goes on this killing spree, killing all of the Marvel heroes, all the Marvel heroes, all the Marvel supervillains, and that's like the what if storyline for something like that. Another big one is what if Superman landed in Soviet Russia during the era that he was supposed to have landed, because the original Superman story has him landing in 1930s, 1940s. So instead of landing in America, what if he lands in Soviet Russia? And they portrayed that what if storyline in an animated film called The Red Sun, which essentially shows him growing up to be the son of Russia instead of this sort of quote unquote son of America that he might be portrayed as in other comics where his actual origin is from. So this is essentially the same thing, whereas what if, Superman landed, but instead of being good, he actually was like very much all for taking advantage of his powers and actually becoming the bad guy, but becoming the bad guy to such an extent that he literally kills people. And it starts off at a very young age, which also makes sense to me as well, because if you consider the fact that in this movie, when he starts developing his powers, he starts building up this sort of hatred, because the plot is still the same. A spaceship crash lands in the middle of Kansas. It's in the middle of Kansas, too, go figure. And this family who can't have children decides to adopt him, and they raise him. I believe he's meant to be 12 or 13 years old, and he starts developing his powers, but his powers are kind of like telling him to do other things. It's kind of like the alien part of him wants to like destroy things over use them for good in a way. So he's battling with whether or not he wants to use these powers for good, or whether or not he wants to give in to the urges his powers is sort of giving to him. And it goes through all these different motions of where he's like sort of being bullied, but then it's also him kind of being the bully. Like there's this sort of scene where he kind of comes off that he might have a little bit of an issue, being kind of, I think, touchy-feely with a girl, and then he gets called a bunch of names, which maybe is misconstrued, but then that also drives him a little bit towards being, like, kind of dark and, not being accepted in a way. And the more the movie goes on, the more it like toils with the kid's kind of mentality, because again, he's like 13 years old, so not only is he dealing with the concept of being a superhero essentially, or having these ridiculous powers because he's not of this world, he's an alien. But he's also going through essentially teenage years. He's going through puberty, he's growing up, he's going through all these different emotions, he's experiencing different things, and he's deciding whether or not he's meant to be sort of, empathetic, or if he's going to be drawn off and just very much closed off emotion wise. And eventually it leads down the path of him truly taking on more of the role of being an evil son of a bitch and just going on this massive killing spree. And it culminates with this huge scene where his mother, who's played by Elizabeth Banks, is like trying to like convince him not to be evil. And what he does is he kind of takes her and he like flies her up into the air. Remember, he's got all the same powers as Superman. It's laser vision, it's super speed, it's super strength, and he even puts on a cape, but the cape is connected to this really creepy mask. And again, he's 13, so he's 13 with all these powers, and he's kind of put on this supervillain persona over a superhero persona. So while the mother's trying to convince him to not do it, he grabs her and he flies her up into the air. And there's this scene where she's really trying to like break through to him and have him understand, like, what you're doing is wrong. Please listen. I'm your mother. I know what's best for you. And he just drops her. He just lets her go and lets her fall straight to the earth and just doesn't give a shit. And even cooler than that, with that kind of being the sort of peak of the film, he then just downs the cape and mask and goes on this massive killing spree during the credits where, now there's news reports coming out about him and they're, superhuman goes on killing spree and is destroying buildings and destroying humans and whatnot. There isn't too much to say. It's literally evil Superman. But it's evil Superman that I thought was done pretty good. And again, this film isn't, highly rated. It isn't the most talked about film. I know there was some talks of possibly a sequel, but nothing has moved forward, unfortunately. It didn't really do much budget-wise. I think it cost like $10 million. I think it made 30. That isn't necessarily the best thing in the world. It's written by two brothers, Brian Gunn and Mark Gunn, who I believe are related to James Gunn, who everybody knows as being the guy who kind of the reason why like Guardians of the Galaxy is huge. He gave us the Suicide Squad sequel. He's got Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 coming out soon. He's also responsible for a lot of the Peacemaker show, and he's drifted a little bit into the horror genre with things like Brightburn, as well as the Belko Experiment, which is a really good film, by the way, as well as Slither from a long time ago, which I don't even think I remember seeing. But I'm guessing the entire, like, Gunn family, between the three of them, I think there might be another one. I'm not too sure. I didn't really know James Gunn had brothers who were also in, like, the film industry in that sense, but his brothers are the guys who wrote this, and it's not bad. I really don't think it's bad. I think it's worth a revisit. I think it's worth talking about, and I also think it's worth giving its praise for being an interesting story. Not every story has to win an Oscar. Not every story has to make millions upon millions of dollars, even though this did do pretty good. 3 times your initial budget. It's still pretty good. But it's a good story, especially for the horror time of year. If you really want to, like, everybody's dressing up as superheroes. Everyone's going to be Spider-Man. Everyone's going to be Captain America, Watch Evil Superman. Like, why not?